Now, let's move straight on to our top story this hour. Unsolved shoplifting cases have hit a 5-year high in what's been called a crime epidemic. It's claimed that organised gangs are being let off the hook after analysis of Home Office data by the Liberal Democrats showed that more than 200,000 reports of shoplifting, that's 560 a day, went unsolved in the year ending July 2023. Meanwhile, separate research from the Labour Party showed that just 1 in 200 crimes was being solved by police over the past 12 months. Still with me in the studio is writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth, and we're also joined by former Met Police detective Peter Bleksley. Thank you very much indeed, Candice, for staying with us, and Peter, welcome to you. So, to my mind, this is a continuing problem, that there are so many issues regarding the police that we can blame the police if we like, but to my mind, we have to hold our political masters responsible for this, or where do we point the finger of blame?
Well, it's a huge problem, this shoplifting in particular. This 200,000 figure doesn't get anywhere near the truth of the matter because, of course, there are countless shopkeepers that have simply given up on reporting shoplifting to the police because they know they will get no kind of response whatsoever.
Is that because the targets that even the police announced, saying we're not going to go after anything, I think it was 250 quid, that we're just not going to bother? So, to my mind, that's just a blank pass. Anybody who wants to steal, then they'll go, well, I'm not going to get caught. Why wouldn't I? It's free money.
Well, that was the folly of the Crime and Sentencing Bill of 2014, which set a level of £200 under which no cases would get referred to the higher courts, to the Crown Courts. And, of course, the police chose to use that, and they went public foolishly, saying, so we won't investigate anything less than that amount. And what did they do? They created a shoplifters charter. And it's taken a decade or so for criminals to kind of get switched on to the fact that you can now go out, go into a shop and pretty much steal with impunity. Not entirely across the board, but in many, many examples. There are stores that tell their staff not to intervene, non-intervention policies they're called. And so if you are of a criminal mind and you think, well, I can go into a shop, steal what I like, not be challenged, not be detained, not be arrested, not have the police turn up, not be prosecuted, not go to court and not be suitably punished, then why wouldn't you do it?
Well, exactly. And I suppose part of the issue here also is I'm assuming if somebody steals once, then they steal multiple times. So we're actually dealing, even though it's £200, what we've done is we've allowed a limit which allows people to return again under the banner that it's that amount. But in fact, they're presumably responsible for many thousands of pounds worth of thefts.
Entirely possible. People don't, generally speaking, get caught for their first offence, although they always say it is, needless to say. And now we've got the police bowing to certain political pressure, saying we're going to attend, like they've said they would do with burglaries. Well, talk's cheap and policing's expensive, and they don't really have as sufficient officers that they would like to be able to attend every call. So there is not going to be some sudden shift whereby every shoplifter gets prosecuted, every burglar gets caught, and we live in some kind of crime-free nirvana where we can leave our front doors open.
Well, that would be nice to go back to the 1950s and to do that again. Prior to my time, obviously. It's what people tell me. What about, though, this whole shift away from what I would describe as proper policing to PCSOs? Am I right or wrong, in your opinion, to hold part of the finger to account that we've allowed PCSOs to come in, what's the point, and CCTV to nanny us on the basis that that doesn't catch anyone?
Yeah, well, major investigations, and basically I think this is what the police are going to shrink back to. I feel that in 10 years' time or so, maybe a bit longer, because we've got a rise of the private security industry, a huge rise, and some of those are now rolling out patrols across private roads or public roads whereby residents can chip in and pay enough to have their own private police service that also prosecute people as well as arresting them and detaining them. That's going to be the future because, unfortunately, what is happening is our police are now becoming largely irrelevant to the crimes that affect the moderate mainstream of Britain. As we hear, shoplifting, burglary, car theft, phone theft, bicycle theft, and I could go on.
Because we all end up paying for all of this. I know that people say, you know, very often if you're stealing from a shop, it's kind of one of those crimes where no one really suffers. Well, the thing is, we're all seeing a cost of living crisis, so the more that's stolen from the shops, the more it affects their profit margins, which means that perhaps they have to get money from elsewhere and make provision for it. If we've got to have a bigger police service or force or whatever you want to call it, that costs more money. And also in terms of people's safety and security. This is the quality of life that we have. So there are so many costs that we, the public, end up paying. To my mind, I don't know whether it's just the political will, but I also do look at the police and I wonder whether or not they've focused their resources as best they can on the basis that they seem to spend more time worrying about whether they're he, she, they, it or something else, as opposed to what they should actually be doing and building respect back into our communities.
Ah, but you see, we have a generation of senior police officers now who all prowl the corridors of policing power with letters after their names because they all went off to university, because they look down at the nose of people like me who leave school at 16, become a police cadet at 17 and then a constable at 18.
What's wrong with going to university? Should I leave now?
You don't need a degree to be a good police officer, whether that be on the front line or occupying a position of policing power. What you need is common sense and the ability to see round the corner, which often comes with experience. So what they did, these people, with all the letters after their name, they have contributed to the greater disconnect between the public and the police, because they look down their noses at the stuff that we did back in the day. Now, policing wasn't perfect then. I utterly accept that. But it wasn't as bad as a lot of these university-educated police bosses will have you think. And we did patrol the streets. And what did we make those streets? A hostile environment for criminals. And how many millions of people would like that back?
Let me bring Candice into the discussion here. So I didn't realise that this was going to move into a class war. Is that a fair assessment? Have we allowed too many people with letters after their name and university degrees into the corridors of police power?
Well, it's something that I hear some people who work as policemen say, that yes, that sometimes you feel like priorities have shifted a little bit and maybe people focus more on political issues, cultural issues, social issues, because that's what they're comfortable doing, less so than things that are happening on the street, or maybe people don't come from certain backgrounds, so they have less insight into what's going on. I mean, that is something that many police officers do raise, that maybe you do need just a bit more time on the street, getting to know criminals, getting to know what's going on, and that should be more important than, say, having a university degree, to policing anyway.
Because I find it extraordinary that even though we know, and I'm sure that there are plenty of things that the police can turn their attention to in terms of the technology they have or the systems that they need to put in place and the data that they analyse and all that good stuff. But also, I think there is an element of perception is reality with policing. And the perception from the public is that they're not there, and they're not there in their faces. They're not there on our streets. They're not there with regular people that we get to know and trust and like, and that they know their environment because they're always moving around and changing. And we're not deploying the resources that we have as effectively as we might. Is that a fair assessment, would you say?
That is not just perception. That is the truth. They are not there. So many millions of people do not know the name, the telephone number, and where they can actually have a meeting with their local police officer. Because neighbourhood policing was decimated, police stations were closed, and senior cops deployed them to other priorities. And that's where we're at.
So, if you were in the ear of either Rishi Sunak or indeed of Keir Starmer, or both, and you were able to give them, and I know this is unfair, but I'll do it anyway, 2 or 3 things that they could really make a difference to policing up and down this nation, what would your advice be?
Community policing, it is crucial. Call it what you like, neighbourhood policing, beat bobbies, call it what you want. That is it. And do not judge a police officer's effectiveness entirely by the amount of arrests they make. Patrolling the streets, and you see academics will argue against this, patrolling the streets is not necessarily effective. They will say it doesn't reduce crime. Well, reducing crime is an immeasurable in that regard. So neighbourhood policing, absolutely crucial. Ditch the necessity to have a degree to be in policing, so you then open it up to a huge new cohort of people who could quite properly be talented, dedicated public servants. And when it comes to the corridors of power, a reconnect to let them know that policing is public service and not self-service, and I'll take an angle grinder to that greasy polar promotion and reinvent the process.
And when it comes, though, to rebuilding that trust in the police, presumably they've got to deal with the elephants in the room. So they've got to deal with perceived as a racist organisation. They've got to deal with the sex pests or otherwise, or whatever you want to call them, within that force, that has to be rooted out. We have to be able to trust every single officer that we meet up and down the scale, however senior or junior they may be.
Now and then, enlightened seats of learning invite me in to speak to young police officers who are going through their degree courses with a view to having a career in policing. And I speak to them. And I say to them, how difficult is it to get up every day and do the right thing and challenge somebody who doesn't do the right thing? Just how difficult is that? Because it shouldn't be very difficult at all.
Seemingly it shouldn't be difficult, but isn't part of the problem also that we've relied on technology, things like CCTV, and now we're hearing that facial recognition and all these other things might be coming in. Is that really the answer?
To doing the right thing, it's no barrier. Doing the right thing is a state of mind. It's what needs to be ingrained into people. It's what needs to be drilled into them throughout the training process, which doesn't need to be a degree, sorry for repeating myself, but just drummed into people. The default position of the police, each and every time, even when it's challenging, you do the right thing and you do the right thing for the public.
Candice, final word to you perhaps on this. In terms of doing the right thing, do you agree with what Peter said? Is that the way that we fix our police force?
Sure, and I do think there needs to be restoration of public trust. I think people like Wayne Couzens and David Carrick have done enormous damage, especially amongst women. And that is a real tragedy because, of course, who's the first person you turn to if you're in trouble? You want to call the police. But now I think a lot of women have a more damaged perception of that in their head. And that's really awful. But I think that they can do the work to repair that damage.
Well, I think there's those elements of damage to repair, but also, as you talk about race relations in different communities up and down the United Kingdom, where some people might feel better served than others. But arguably, there are places in the country where we do have pockets. I know that it's all bad or all good as far as the media is concerned. We should be looking at the best practice, the best places that operate, and then perhaps bringing those in around the country and taking a look at leadership once again as to whether or not we're going to deal with our policing. And also, is it time for zero tolerance?
I entirely agree with you. In Cumbria, not so many months ago, they reintroduced a beat constable, and in a matter of a few short weeks, where he'd engaged with so many people throughout the community who knew who he was, antisocial behaviour was reduced by 50%.
And I think the thing is that we look at the data that comes through and we analyse in the past in the same way that CCTV, yes, it's a tool, yes, it can be used, but very often criminals will know how to avoid it. They'll wear their hoodies, they'll know it's there. We are one of the most surveilled countries in the world, and yet it hasn't reduced our crime. Surely that should tell us that means that we have to deploy. And I think you're right. I don't think there is any alternative but for eyes and ears on the street and people who are recruited for their skills and their integrity, not because they're, of a certain background or not of a certain background, that we're picking and choosing and prioritising when we're recruiting in the wrong ways.
And maybe Peter will correct me because obviously he has a lot more experience, but I do know in, for instance, sexual assault cases, knowing the community, knowing people in the community, if you're looking for a suspect, a perpetrator, thinking, I may know who this person is. It helps a lot with investigating and solving crimes.
Undoubtedly, I echo those words entirely. What also helps is just if you've got experienced detectives or committed career detectives doing those investigations. I know as a fact that many cases fall down because of the lamentable standards of the investigations. Well, that's what happens when you have direct entry detectives, people coming into the police and instantly becoming detectives after all they've done is watch a couple of episodes of Vera. That ain't the way to do it. Ditch all that kind of nonsense and get experienced police officers, cut their teeth on the ground, then apply for and become a detective.
Well, the word I will take from that is lamentable. that's a truly excoriating review as to how they behave. There we go. Peter Bleksley, former Met police detective. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.